Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Listen, we understand how important each of you are, and so we are trying to keep this party rolling. How about that? Words cannot express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time out of your schedules to register, to participate, to show up, and help us make this an amazing conference. On behalf of our office, our staff, our team, all the players who have come to the table to bring this conference to fruition, I am so very over the moon elated as your chief diversity officer to be able to host the first one. Man, please give me your hands and give a round of applause to CSN. We did it. We did it. We did it. We have some great corporate sponsors. I see Danita from our foundation office, our director of our foundation. She's here. Danita, thank you so very much. We really sincerely appreciate you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Enshi. Thank you all so very much. And of course, words again cannot express on behalf of myself and Raquel Melson and Jennifer Denson. We cannot thank Aisha Kidd and the entire CAPE team for all that they've done to help make this possible. With that, everybody, I'm so excited to introduce, I call him my big little brother. My big little brother. God, it felt like a Jolly Rancher got caught right there. I called him a big little something. I don't know what I was going to call him, but he's my big little brother, everybody. I appreciate him so very, very much. Anytime we pick up the phone and call him, he's Johnny on the spot right there for us. And with this today, hey, he just says, Lawrence, whatever you need, count MGM there. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our platinum sponsor, MGM Resorts, and my big little brother, Mr. Tony Gladney.
Thanks, brother Larry. I'll say that from a standpoint of the time invested that I know him, but with all due respect, I will call him Dr. Weekly and let him know how very, very proud his big little brother is of him. When I think of Dr. Weekly, I think of when you need inspiration, when you need someone to just let you know you think you got it rough. Hey, let me share some things with you. And all of a sudden you go out and you feel like you can conquer the world. So please give him a round of applause for Dr. Weekly. So I want to take a couple of minutes before I introduce what I believe is a true blessing for us today to have the speaker that we have here in the midst, but to tell this group how much MGM Resorts and its 60,000 plus employees are truly, truly proud and honored to continue to sponsor this great endeavor. You know, years back when we were approached to sponsor this effort, we were in the midst of instituting the industry's first diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And so at the same time, we had our challenges. There were many that expressed to us, you know, do y'all really want to take that on? And we knew that it was something that needed to be done and needed to be completed and needed to be put into a direction of a sustainable purpose in our industry and in this city and in the country. And so when we saw the effort that was taking place with the Diversity Summit, we couldn't say no. To see the ongoing years of the collaboration between College of Southern Nevada, which we thank you all, and we're here in the midst, and thank you for hosting with all of your great leaders, Dr. Saragosa, and all of the great leaders that continue to have an impact. Desert Research Institute, UNLV, and Nevada State University. I want to make sure I get that right. Round of applause there. And to see this collaboration and the impact that it continues to make, not only on the talent that we have here in this room from a public sector perspective, but the impact that you have on the private sector industry. What's taking place and what you all are endeavoring on impacts people like me and my colleagues to make the right decisions, to give us the courage to continue to speak truth to power, to make sure that we're standing up to the assaults on DEI that we see on a daily basis. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for what you continue to do to make this city, this state, and all its private and public institutions better. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to someone that I had the pleasure of talking to for a few minutes. And you know, I got the reports before I came in. I expressed I was going to bring a few comments as far as being a sponsor, but also I was able to carry out some research on your speaker today, as well as sitting down and speaking with her. And before I read through her bio, I'm going to give you my personal view of from talking to her for several minutes in the back room there. I don't want to say the back room, but in the holding area. Because Dr. Weekly will check me on that and says, what you talking about? Always 5'4", and you say in the back room? Green room. Thank you, Dr. Weekly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A little humor there. There's some phrases that came to mind in speaking to Dr. Garcia in the time that I spoke to her before I am coming before you presently. I looked at her in my conversation with her as far as a leader that changes mindsets. I looked to her in my conversation with her as far as a pioneer that is a subject matter expert in ushering in change, in changing mindsets, as I expressed. And also, every day that we go through what we go through within our endeavors, within our careers and changing lives, one of the things that we seek to accomplish is changing paradigm shifts, being change agents. This is what I saw in talking to Dr. Garcia. Dr. Gina Ann Garcia is a professor of higher education in the Berkeley School of Education at UC Berkeley. And I'll regress, she's actually a California homegirl, and I'm actually from the San Francisco Bay Area. So, you know, we got a little bit of some sister brotherly love there. Her research centers on issues of equity and justice in higher education, with an emphasis on understanding how Hispanic serving institutions, HSIs, embrace and enact an organizational identity for serving minoritized populations. She also seeks to understand and experience the experiences of administrators, faculty within HSIs, and the outcomes of experiences of students attending these institutions. Her research looks at ways that race and racism have shaped and the experiences of minoritized group in higher education. That's groups in higher education. Dr. Garcia is an author. Listen, this lady's been busy. She is an author, becoming Hispanic becoming Hispanic serving institutions, opportunities for colleges and universities, Johns Hopkins University Press, 2019, for which she won the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education Book of the Year in 2020, and the editor of the book, Hispanic Serving Institutions in Practice. She's been busy, I told you. Defining Servingness at HSI's Information Age Publishing 2020. Her newest book is Transforming Hispanic Serving Institutions for Equity and Justice, Johns Hopkins University Press, 2023, which is now available. So y'all go out and if you haven't, went out and purchased this, please do. She has delivered over 150 public lectures and workshops across the country and consults directly with HSIs to work towards organizational transformation. She is also the host of the podcast, Que Pasa, HSIs. In other words, what's up, Hispanic Serving Institutions? Dr. Garcia graduated from California State University Northridge with a bachelor's degree in marketing, the University of Maryland, College Park with a master's degree in college student personnel, and the University of California, Los Angeles with a PhD in higher education and organizational change. She is a proud alumni of HSI and was the title coordinator at California State University Fullerton, which drives and motivates her research and praxis. Please put your hands together for a true blessing and a true treat for Dr. Garcia. Hold on, I'm messing up. Hold on.
This is actually for you, for MGM, as a thank you for your sponsorship.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, then I'm going to go through that again. Please put your hands together because you are in for a treat. Dr. Gina and Garcia.
We ready? All right. Good. I was going to say good morning. Good afternoon, right? Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Happy to be here with y'all today. And look, I'm breaking stuff already. I just barely got here. Just got here. I know. You gave me all the directions and then I went and broke it. We was back there getting all kind of directions. Mostly it was about this mic because I was like, can I have a mic? I want to walk around so people could see my pants. For reals. I'm not even kidding. My kids were like, those pants are cool. Your legs look so long today, Mom. I said, thanks. I got to get on a plane. Bye. So thank you for the welcome and for having me today. I'm excited to be here to talk to you all about this idea of servingness and what it means for Hispanic serving institutions, also other minority serving institutions, because I know there is dual designations here in Nevada, including ANAPISI, the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions. So I'm going to talk about this idea of servingness through the lens of HSIs and through the lens of the servingness framework, and to talk us through what does that actually mean. So when y'all hear HSIs, like how many of y'all think pretty confidently, you're like, yeah, I know what an HSI is. I read all your books. I'm good. I know what you're talking about. Go ahead, raise your hand. No, nobody's read my book. Where y'all been? Yeah, y'all better get that. All right, how many of you kind of know? You're like, I'm kind of knowing, a little bit know, yeah? Okay, a little bit know. All right, that's because you're on a servingness journey. I call it a servingness journey, and that's what we go through for this idea of embracing what it means to be a Hispanic serving institution, because in reality, Hispanic serving institution is a federal designation that is enrollment driven. So it's enrollment only. So the federal government says you enroll 25% Hispanic students, boom, HSI. You can then apply for federal grants, and you might do servingness or you might not with those federal grants. And that's a complicated thing as well. Just because you get grants doesn't mean you're doing good servingness work. Just because you get the seal of excellencia, I'm going to say it, doesn't mean you're doing good servingness work. All right. So those of you striving, get those awards, get those badges, but it doesn't mean you're actually doing good servingness work. None of those things. It's all of those things all at the same time. And sometimes none of those things, and you're still doing servingness, if that makes sense. I'm going to talk a little bit about that idea beyond the federal designation. Oh, look at that. We started way. This is like the end of the presentation. I gotta go back. I was like, where are we? First, it took a while to get up there. La, 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 la. Let's go. Oh, no, more. All right. So this is the book cover for defining servingness and practice at Hispanic serving institutions. I like to talk about the book cover because the person who developed this art for me, Alberto Ledesma, heard me talk one time about the idea of a feeling of HSI. Remember I said if you get the seal of excellency or you get the grants or you read all the books, you might still not be an HSI, you might still not be doing servingness. One of the things I talk about is a feeling. All right, so get rid of all the ideas that higher ed says you got to, graduation and measures and assessment, and just think about what it would feel like to be at an institution that embodies servingness. What would it feel like? And if you are Hispanic, Latinx, Latine, however you identified, how would it feel for an institution to feel like it's for you, like it's serving you? And how would it feel like if you're not in that category to still feel like it's serving you? That a place that is about racial equity and justice could actually embody practices that embrace all racialized, minoritized identities. What would that feel like? And so one of the ways that I've talked about it is through murals and through artwork. And this isn't out of like nowhere. My dissertation, I actually asked people, what does it feel like to be at an HSI? What do you think it means to be at an HSI? And people would say things like, well, we have murals. And I was like, say more. Say more. As a qualitative researcher, it wasn't enough, right? That's a survey, right? That's a survey response. We have murals, boom. Qualitative researcher, I'm like, say more. And people are like, well, in ethnic studies department, there are murals and they are by folks of color, they're by communities of color from, ethnic studies movements, and the murals feel like an HSI. And I was like, that's powerful. So of course I went and visited as a good qualitative researcher that I am, doing a case study, go visit these spaces that people were talking about, and I feel it, right? It feels like an HSI simply because of the artwork on the wall. Like when you walk into the space, it feels different. Now you could ask people the opposite and say, where doesn't it feel like HSI? And you don't want them to say your department. You know where people say sometimes, y'all giggle. You know what students have told me? Admissions and records. Yeah, I know. Funny, but not funny, because everybody got to go to admissions records. And I'm like, and admissions and records, really? Students are like, yeah, they're not very nice there. I'm like, okay, where else? Financial aid? Financial aid? Really? You got to go to financial aid. HSI, the other thing with HSI is it is the two core dimensions of being a Hispanic serving institutions is you enroll a large percentage of Hispanic, Latinx, Latine people, and also high Pell Grant enrolling or high low income enrolling institutions. So you don't want them to say that financial aid isn't a good place, that financial aid doesn't feel. You want them to say financial aid feels good. I go to financial aid and there's murals in financial aid and they speak Spanish in financial aid. That's pretty cool. Right? Stuff like that. That's what people say when they're thinking about what does it feel like to be at an HSI. Not that Spanish is the only language that embodies servingness, but it's one that people are talking about, right? Particularly when you're thinking about, Spanish speaking students, which not all Hispanic, not all Latinx, not all Latine students actually speak Spanish, but it's a part of the feeling. And so that's where the motivation for the book cover comes from. Now, this book was an edited book, and it's basically was a process of defining servingness in practice. So my colleagues and I, we proposed the servingness framework, and then we asked people, with the edited book, asked people to write chapters about how they were doing that with their Title III and Title V grants. Anybody worked with the Title V or a Title III grant? Okay, couple folks. So folks writing the grants, doing the HSI work, which sometimes is the only people doing HSI work on a campus. That's problematic. If you want to be a whole entire HSI, everyone should be thinking about HSI. But those folks wrote these chapters and said, these are some of the things we're doing. And so I'll talk through some of those. If you want to have access to the presentation, here's the link. So feel free to grab it now before I go to the next slides. But I'll talk through some of these chapters and also some other articles that have come up since, where we spend time, me and other colleagues, thinking about what is servingness, what is the H in HSIs? How do we elevate the H? Although I've started to talk a lot about elevating the I, because institutions are different. Community colleges are different than four-year institutions. My institution, UC Berkeley, wants to be an HSI real bad. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to be an HSRI. So what does it look like to do research with communities? What it look like to train future, to train doctoral students to be future faculty at an HSRI, right? Like the R matters. So elevating the I is a part of this. Elevating the S is the servingness. And actually, in my newer book, I start talking about complicating the H, right? That the H is not a monolith. And that one's hard. It's like, how do you serve a group that's really, really diverse? Like highly diverse. The H itself embodies 20 different ethnicities and a bunch of different languages. Lots of different languages, not just Hispanic, lots of indigenous languages. Portuguese is in there, right? If you're from Brazil, there's a lot wrapped up in the H alone. So taking each piece, but with this, I talk about, with servingness, I talk specifically about the H. So these are the basics, 571 HSIs in the country. For comparison, HBCUs are less than 100. Yet if I ask the same question, how many of y'all know what an HBCU is? How many of y'all gonna raise your hand? Did y'all see the difference? More people know what an HBCU is because they're historic and because Beyonce did Homecoming. And so, there's that, Kamala Harris, vice president, graduate of an HBCU. There's like mainstream understanding for those of you that, I'm going to really date myself, that watched A Different World. Some of us, when we were little young folks, we watched it on TV. Right? That like A Different World was like, wow, I didn't know it was HBCU culture, but now I do, right? I came to understand that was HBCU culture, but most people don't know the 571 institutions, right? Most folks don't talk about HSI. One day, Bad Bunny's going to do a concert just like Beyonce. It's going to embody HSI culture. So, and with that, of the 30 states and locations, Puerto Rico institutions, all of them are HSIs. Every institution in Puerto Rico is an HSI by definition. And most are like at 98%, as you can imagine, Latinx, Latina, Hispanics. There are 19% of all institutions in the country, and this number is growing. We see the emerging list. We also see what I call strivers. So emerging is like, coming into the 25%. Striving is places like UC Berkeley, where I'm at now, UCLA, that are striving, like actively trying to figure out how are we going to get to the 25% and trying to figure out HSI before we even get there. So this 19% is changing since I started doing this research every year, 1%. So by next year, these data, when I show this same slide next year, it's going to say 20%, then 21, 22. We're going to be at 25% of all institutions in no time, which means maybe we're a Hispanic serving state, right? If we say 25% of all colleges and universities, we're saying HSIs are 25% of all the students in the institution. So that's kind of powerful, right? This is a group of students that we know is going to continue to increase enrollment in colleges and universities. So if you want to do good work by students of color, by Hispanic students, Latinx students, this is a good place to do it within HSIs. Now, wait a minute, what did I skip? This thing is just going all over. Oh no, okay, there we go. So I talked about the I, remember the elevation of the I? This is something to think about. What does it mean to be a Hispanic serving community college versus a Hispanic serving four-year institution? I've been talking to a lot of community colleges. I've really been thinking about the community college piece a lot. And the community colleges in California in particular, they're doing some pretty innovative things, and they're actually getting real savvy with thinking about their HSI identity along with some of the state mandates. They're very driven by state mandates in California, and they're like, all right, well, we have to do guided pathways. Well, we can do guided pathways and HSI at the same time. right? Starting to think, how do you start to do these different things that we're doing as an institution already? So to be an HSI doesn't mean you get rid of who you were historically. It means you do more, right? You embrace a new identity, which is the HSI identity. So yeah, regional diversity matters. I've been working with some HSIs in the Northeast, and they are different, particularly in the types of Hispanic, Latinx, Latina students they're enrolling. They're different, right? We're different. Like I said, the H is different. So the regional diversity matters a lot. Different things going on in different regions. The size, the type, the control, public or private. Publics is where I spend a lot of time, but I've been spending some time with some privates, and they're fascinating. Privates can move differently than some of the public institutions. That's a good thing. It can be a good thing, particularly in states. The regionals becoming important in places where there's big attacks on DEI, right? We know that that's happening. So Texas, for example. Texas is like, oh, what are we going to do? Can we still be HSI? There's a lot of HSIs in Texas, only second to California as far as the number. And so they're really starting to think, how do we still do it? And I've seen some of the privates being able to maneuver a little bit quicker than the publics, because like, well, we can maneuver around, right? Some of the state policies. So there's a lot going on and a lot of sense making. This is sense making. You're on a journey. How many of y'all have ever listened to Get Boss HSIs? All right, you get a prize. You get a hug at the end of this. Of course you have, Esther. You're the only one that's read my book and also listened to Get Boss HSIs. She's like my fan club. She probably told you all to come today. She's like, don't skip this session. Go listen to Gina. So Get Boss HSIs. All right. By the time we're done, you all going to be on your phones. You can get on your phone now. I don't mind. I'm not one of those like, don't look on your phone. Get on your phone and listen to Get Boss HSIs, because we are talking about servingness on Get Boss HSIs. And we talk about the journey. Every single episode, I'd say, tell me about your servingness journey. Tell me about your servingness journey. By the way, you're going to love this week's episode. It's on undocumented students. This week coming up, Sandy Lopez from the University of, I'm going to get it wrong, Northern Illinois University, not Northeastern Illinois University, which is this week's guest, but she talks about serving undocumented students at HSI. So that conversation is coming in. But every episode I ask people, tell me about your servingness journey, because it's not a linear journey. So maybe you find out about HSI, and then maybe you're like me and you doubt it. And you say, this isn't a thing. This is fake. We're still doing the same thing we've always done. We're getting money from the federal government. We're getting multi-million-dollar grants from the federal government. We're doing everything the same that we've always done. That's not HSI. That was me as a naysayer when I was a Title V implementer. So the journey is real. Obviously, I've come to, I've been on a journey myself, and I have come to different points where I feel differently about HSIs. I feel like we're in a cool moment where people are really embracing this, because at some point, really, we can't not. Right, we have to think about the fact that 571 and growing is the number of institutions in the country that are now HSIs. This is the population. So one of the big questions I get is, well, and it's starting to simmer down a little bit. I do a lot of myth like busting, right? And then that one simmers down and then another one comes up. One of the big ones was, does it mean we don't serve other students now if we only serve this one? It doesn't say Hispanic only. The federal government doesn't require you to only serve Hispanic students. They actually can't do that, right? Especially attacks on affirmative action have made it that we cannot do those sort of things, right? So of course it's not Hispanic only. So we are seeing a big group of other students enrolling in HSIs. So all these students also still need to be served. Right. And so when we think about HSI, I saw this video recently from UC Santa Cruz. I loved it. It was like a 2-minute video on like Instagram or something, or YouTube. And they defined their HSI work. And it said in there that we are doing structural change, right? That's what I talk about, structural change. And structural change is going to have some benefit on all the students, right? But it doesn't mean you can't do equity work, because I like the idea of structural change benefiting all, because it does, but equity work still requires you to focus on the students that need some extra support, right? So if you're committed to equity and you see that your Black students, even if they're only 2% at your HSI, are struggling, then you don't let the 2% just struggle. You actually bring them along in the equity work, and you say, you know what, we're not going to leave our Black students behind, because we are serving to racially minoritized students. Also, guess what? Some Black students are also Hispanic. That's the hard part for people, is like we have to stay in boxes. We don't have to stay in boxes. Some of your students who are checking Latinx, Latine are also checking Black. So we're not saying there's one or the other. You don't have to only do one thing. We can be multiple things at the same time. We can walk and talk at the same time. See me, and I even have fancy shoes. So if I can do it, you can do it, right? We can be colleges and universities and serve students all at the same time, multiple students, right? So some HSIs are starting to think about these intersections, right? Now, if you're an Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving an institution also, then you're thinking about this. And particularly Anapizis think about Pacific Islander students, Filipino students, right? Students who have been minoritized within this group as well. That's where the equity work comes in. So we can do equity work. Now, these students here, they never feel like they get left behind. I work with a lot of students, and white students, people get all concerned. It's like, they're not really that concerned, actually. And the more we do this work, and the students who are entering colleges and universities, our white students have been in diverse spaces their whole lives. Particularly HSIs, because HSIs are reflective of diverse communities. They're just like, this is just how it is. Like, it's just diverse, right? They're not seeing it necessarily as a zero-sum game either, right? And your white students, because we're committed to whiteness still, even when we're HSIs, they're still graduating, they're still getting jobs, they're still becoming president of the United States, even though they've been indicted 91 times. You know, it's fine. They're gonna be fine, y'all. It's gonna be fine. I like how I throw them little jokes in, huh? I got jokes. You got lots of jokes. So your white students, they're going to be fine. That's my point. They're going to be fine. Don't worry about them. They're going to be good. Worry about your Black students. Worry about your Latinx students, because these students tend to have the greatest inequities in college outcomes and college access. So your high schools might not be reflective of your colleges and universities. Your high schools might actually be more diverse than even your colleges and universities because of admissions processes, right? So we have to think about our students of color and thinking about, are we actually serving the region, right? Are we doing good regional work? This is the low income first gen. So low income and students of color is very much wrapped up in first gen to college, right? So a lot of our students at HSIs are also first gen to college, right? And so that comes up, that conversation comes up. Now, what I encourage you to do is do and. So it's and work, it's X, Latinx, by, low income, by, first gen, rather than one, because some research has shown that people are doing HSI work in race neutral ways, and they're keeping Latinx out of there, and they're only focusing on low income and first gen. And that doesn't feel right to people who are thinking, well, but you're an HSI because of your Hispanic students, right? So you do need to elevate that and center that. So think about it as an intersection. And then all of these intersections come up. Some may be US born, some may be immigrant, some may be DACA, some may be mixed status, bilingual, bicultural. They might want to stay close to home. They might have internships in employment. They might be full-time, part-time employed. There are all sorts of things. This makes it really, really hard to do servingness. This is why we think equity work, who needs more support than others. We know that's what equity work is. We can elevate support for groups that need it the most, and that we're doing structural change, right? So those two things alone should be guiding your work within this HSI if you want to be an HSI committed to racial equity, which is what I talk about a lot. That's how you don't become an exclusive institution. So the servingness framework, so that's the book that I talked about. If you pull the slides, there are some articles here that help define servingness a little bit more if you want to like look into it a little bit more. But let me show you the framework. So this is the framework we proposed back in 2019. Lots of research has come out since. We proposed this framework based on a literature review. And a literature review at that time, what I would say based on my own experience with doing HSI research is that a lot of the research starts to blow up in 2015. Right around 2015, we started to see this emergence of empirical evidence. Prior to 2015, we saw things like policy briefs, public, policy and private, I'm saying all the things, policy briefs and practice, that P. I was like, where's the P I want? Practice briefs, policy briefs, stuff like that were coming out about HSIs. Excellencia in Education had been writing a lot of policy briefs. There's tons of policy briefs that come out of Excellencia prior to 2015. We see this emergence of scholarship around 2015, and it hasn't slowed down since. We've just seen this steady increase. People are thinking about HSIs empirically. And so this was a review of the literature, but since 2017, we've also seen a lot more. So what we did was we saw that people were making sense of HSI in two ways, structurally. So people were writing, well, we changed our curriculum. We changed our math curriculum. We got an HSI grant and we changed the math curriculum. And then we measured GPA, right? So if you change the structures, what happens to the outcomes? That was what we were seeing in research. Some of it wasn't as straightforward like that, but that's how we were making sense of it, is if you change the structure for serving, as we call it, what's going to be the outcome? Now, the outcomes were other things we were seeing in the research. One of them was validating. This is validating experiences. So we saw that people were writing about the fact that HSIs are validating to students. So culturally validating and linguistically validating. So students might say, well, you know, I can speak Spanish to a faculty member or a staff, because I'll show you the data. There aren't as many Latine faculty at HSIs yet, but our staff tend to be pretty diverse at HSIs. So they're having validating experiences. There might be a cultural center. There might be Greek organizations that center Latino students. There might be student organizations. They were finding experiences, right? Or they're finding experiences that are validating, right? There's also these racialized experiences. That's been coming out since 2017, a lot more, that people are having bad experiences. So racism still lives here. Let's not pretend like it doesn't. It does. Just because you have a lot of people of color enrolled doesn't mean now racism went away, right? It means we have to contend with the fact that racism still lives here. So that's one of the experiences. So if you're talking to people and they're saying, you know, I've been experiencing some racism and microaggressions, well, we need to talk about that. That's part of servingness, is figuring that out and disrupting it, really. These are the outcomes. So academic outcomes are the ones we tend to focus a lot on. Non-academic outcomes, which I've started calling liberatory outcomes, are these other things that students experience. How many of y'all have a degree in like college student personnel or student affairs? Okay, a couple of y'all. So those of you, I have a degree in college student personnel. That's what we study a lot in those programs, right? It's like, what else happens in college, right? That's how those student programs came about, really, was like, what else is going on in college campuses beyond the academic outcomes? And so we see a lot of that, and we know from research that students do develop over time in college. So how does that become a part of your servingness work? And so that's why I'm really pushing people to think beyond the academic outcomes, right? So the GPAs and course completion and 6-year completion, that's all important. But we also can acknowledge that students may have the experience to explore their racial identity in college, and that can be servingness. We can use that as a measure of servingness through our HSI grants and not through our HSI grants in other places as well. So there's lots going on. And then there's external influences up there. And then there's racism, white supremacy up there. And so that cuts across sort of all of it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to skip that because I've pretty much explained that. So the structures, what are structures? I find that in my own work with HSIs and in my own research, and in, you know, when I spend days with campuses, most of the work is focused on structures. There's less going on with the outcomes because we've been doing that work. That's the equity work we've been doing as campuses, right? We've been looking at data. We've been being equity minded. We've been trying to dig into deep explorations of classes, of which classes are producing inequitable outcomes. That's all part of serving us. So yes, do that work. But people are really thinking structurally, we haven't really started becoming an HSI. Like, for example, does your strategic plan say that you are an HSI and that over the next 5 years, you're going to embrace servingness? Most campuses do not have that in their strategic plan. Even campuses that are HSIs, that have multiple Title V grants, that have a seal of excellencia, still no strategic plan. The strategic plan guides everything we do. So if it's not in the strategic plan, we're not doing it. Our institutional governing board's not going to make decisions that aren't in the strategic plan. If it's in the strategic plan, they're like, huh. And I say that because I'm working with institutional board governance data right now, trustees. And trustees make decisions based on strategic plans. They make decisions based on what presidents guide them on. And if the conversation about HSI is not happening at those upper levels, then your people at the lower levels, I call the grassroots leaders, are spinning their wheels, but only going so far because the upper level of the administration isn't yet willing to embrace HSI. That's powerful. How do you get this into your strategic plan so that it starts to become something that is really something that's moving? Your diversity is a big one. I'll show you data, curriculum, your mission, your policies, your practices, decision-making, all of this is structures. So it's really complex. It's really long-term work. This is why it's a journey, the servingness journey. So one of the chapters in the book was written by some folks at Cal Lutheran University, and they weren't an HSI yet. This wasn't a merger. This was a striver. And what they did was they were trying to figure out how to become an HSI before you become an HSI. And so they looked at their mission, they looked at their strategic plan, they looked at their faculty diversity. They did all that sort of pre-planning before they even got to the HSI numbers. They also talked a lot about identity work, which is what I talk about in my work, is how do you become an HSI is your identity. And so they talked about different things that they did as part of their efforts. One of them was the task force. I always talk about task force, HSI task force. This work cannot be one person alone. I've been that person, Title V implementer, very lonely work when you're one person on an entire campus and nobody else cares about HSI except in name only and on one line on a website. It's hard work to do. When you get a committee, you get folks involved, start moving, that's where stuff starts moving. I've seen some really powerful work because entire campuses are getting on board, not just one or two people. So task force is one way, but I encourage you, if you're going to launch a task force, to give them a task and make it have an end. Because you know those committees that you get involved with and then they never end? Just keep going and going. We've all been on those. I'm on a few of those now. Just keep going. you gotta have an end, right? What's the end? The end is we come up with a strategic plan. We come up with something to advance. We come up with something to present to the university. We invite Gina Garcia to come to campus and she's going to change everybody's mindset. That happens too, y'all. So feel free, invite me. It's fine. I'm happy to come change mindsets, but that's part of the process, right? And others. There's lots of folks that are doing this work that we're starting to bring to campuses and help campuses get moving. Right, we got to get moving. We can't just sit and think HSI is going to happen. It's not. It's something that has to actively become. So the task force is a really good way. Here's the data. Everything, the yellow boxes, that's white faculty at HSIs. It's the exact opposite of the student population. So the yellow box, imagine your student population, that's the yellow box is typically your students of color, and the other outside is your white students. It's the exact opposite. So you have more white faculty on campus, on HSI campuses than anything. A white student here, these ratios say that a white student is more likely to interact with a white faculty member at an HSI, even though they're maybe the minority group. The white population might be the minority group, but they're much more likely to interact with somebody like them in offices and in faculty. So this is a huge conversation for institutions. How do we change? How do we become more diverse at our faculty level? It's a complicated question because for one, faculty, I used to say faculty don't die. It's kind of true. Faculty just be I was on a panel yesterday. This is a diversion. I was like, yo, you've been here a long time. They're like, I started UC Berkeley in 1936. I was like, whoa, bro, you should go home. Why are you here? I mean, they're talking about their great grandkids. I'm like, why are you on a panel? Sheesh, you go home. So faculty, they don't go away. I'll say that. They want to keep intellectualizing, and that's what was going on. And I love the panel. I learned a lot from this very cool, wise, elder panel, but they've been around doing this stuff a long time. They got to move out the way. Move out the way, because you know what? All they was talking about was their white history of UC Berkeley, and I was like, what about Black students? What about Black history? What about Latinx history? What about Pacific Islander? What about queer history? What about women history? Move out the way. We'll learn from you. I loved it. I love the panel, but also that's why the faculty don't change, because faculty need to let other folks come in and start doing differently. Now, why is this important? Because faculty of color, the data show us they're more likely to engage in community engaged research. They're more likely to engage in culturally relevant practices. They're more likely to mentor students of color. Students of color are more likely to go to them for these things. So it matters to our students if that's who our student population is. I mentioned research because if you're a researcher or institution, we should be doing community engaged research that matters to our communities, not that matters to who knows what. that's just going to go in a book somewhere? What about that community engaged research that it's actually going to move, right? What we're doing and change what's going on. So this matters a lot. We have to address this. It's got to be very intentional. I talk about, all kind of different things in my newer book, but like cluster hiring is one example. I just talk about UCLA, right? I'm watching UCLA. I did graduate from UCLA. They're also in competition with UC Berkeley. It's kind of a funny competition to who become HSI first. It's in tension with the elitism of these two institutions, which is kind of funny. So they're actively trying to become HSIs, and UCLA, I saw they just hired through a cluster hire like 12 Latina faculty. They're not even an HSI yet. They're doing it now. They're getting ready now, right? That's dope, right? That's cool. And I think they're committed to doing another round this next year, right? So hiring another just group, a cluster, and those faculty are across the institution. They're in chemistry, they're in math, they're in Chicano studies, they're in education, they're in psychology, they're everywhere, they're across the institution. So that matters a lot. Now, this is an interesting one. For those of you that are graduate institutions, these data that me and my graduate student, we randomly did this study. I don't even know where this came out of, but we're like, let's look at some graduate data. HSI or HSIs at the undergraduate level, by definition, it's an undergraduate construct, but at the graduate level, it's still pretty white. That's the summary of this slide. Yeah, so graduate population is still very white. So if you're at a campus with a graduate school, if you dig into your numbers, it gets very lonely for students of color in graduate schools. Now, the other flip side of that I think about, because that's one important thing, is like, we got to be more diverse. This is the pathways into faculty, and this is the pathway into administration, because administration is also still not that diverse at HSIs. So if the pathways are getting really small, then we're not going to see the diversity happening. So how do we affect this? Those of you at community colleges, 2-year, you're like, this doesn't affect us. It does. Your job is to build a graduate going culture for your students of color. Because students of color who are first gen, low income, have no idea what graduate school is. I was that student. No clue. No clue what graduate school is. I'm like, I don't know, I'm getting a degree. I didn't know it was a bachelor's degree. Well, how do we know that? We just go in and we're going to get a degree, and we're going to walk across stage, and our parents are going to come and they're going to cheer, our whole family, and it's going to be dope. That's it, right? Graduate school was not on my mind at all. So how do we start to build that, right? Graduate going culture. So this matters to everybody, is that the numbers get really small. Although I did see the Pew Hispanic Research Center data yesterday or a couple days ago. I don't know if y'all saw though, that the graduate population, Latino, Latine, Latinx population is increasing at the graduate level. So we're doing a good job, but we could do more, particularly at HSIs where the population is there at the undergrad. Starting to encourage folks to go on to graduate school, because that's the pathways into these greater, higher levels of the institution. Curriculum, if you are in charge of curriculum, that's where you do service. So if you're a faculty member, if you're a dean, I gave a talk one time, and a dean, like it was just like this, the dean raised her hand, he said, I'm a dean. What's my role? And I said, you're a dean, bro. You can tell everybody what to do. You got a big role. So if you're a dean, you are charged. Go do good work. Deans and decision makers got to tell us what to do so we know what to do, right? We got to move forward. I'm working with one campus. Their provost said, do liberatory education. Do what Dr. Garcia did. And guess what? A whole faculty committee came together, and they're trying to figure out, how do you do liberatory education in their general ed curriculum? That's powerful. Their provost got on board though. Their provost read my book. Provost called me. I just met with that provost actually a couple days ago. He's like, we're making good progress. Here's what we're doing. How are we going to measure it? I'm like, easy. There's measurements for this stuff, right? So they're figuring out, what does liberatory education look like, right? But that's coming from up above and telling folks like, yeah, figure this out, y'all. We can figure this out. We can figure out what equity and justice and liberation looks like as a collective. But we need support, because folks at the bottom, the grassroots, are often not getting support. So this was a curriculum redesign one. I love this one because this one was in math, and this was at UC Santa Cruz. And what they did with this is really important. They actually looked at their data. They saw students of color were leaving after this math course. Over and over again, students went into the math entry-level algebra course and not getting out. And they're like, well, what's going on? And the answer was, the course is not good. Yeah, y'all laugh, but it's true. The course was terrible from what I've heard. So what is typically the answer? That the students are underprepared, that the students went to the school across the tracks, and that's not a good school. Students are bilingual, so they don't understand. I mean, everything the student, if you look at a course and there's low outcomes of the course over and over again, start looking at the course and the professor. What's wrong with the professor? The students are fine. They're here. They're amazing. They're smart. They're brilliant. That's how we have to embrace them. That's how we have to start thinking about our students. But there's so much deficit thinking going on, particularly at HSIs. There's narrative at some HSIs that now we're not going to be as good of an institution. We're going to lower our standards. That's so racist. It's like hard to even fathom that comes out of people's mouths. So you're saying because we're enrolling more Hispanic students, we're going to be less selective and less of a good premier institution? Like that, there's so much wrapped up in that. And saying that Hispanic, Latinx, Latina students are not nearly as smart as our white students who have been here historically. Right? So deficit thinking is huge. Y'all are here at this conference today, so I already know y'all are on board with me, right? Y'all are like, we with you. I've been in meetings with those people. Guess what? Your job is to start disrupting that. Say, I went to a conference last week and she said the students aren't bad, the course is bad. You could blame me, it's all good. Just get the chapter. Just get the chapter, right? Like people will be like, what? Get the chapter, right? There's nothing wrong with our students. We have to embrace them as they are. That's Tara Yosso's model of community cultural wealth. That students are coming in beautiful and ready and they want to contribute. And a true liberatory education would allow our students to contribute the community cultural wealth that they bring in. That's true liberation, that we would allow in exchange, that we think our students are so amazing that they're going to contribute to the advancement of the educational space. That it doesn't now mean that our institution is not as good because we have a lot of students of color and or Hispanic students. It's actually wrapped up with that specific statement. So the curriculum has got to be addressed. And this one was in math. So I always pick on math, like what's going on in math, y'all? Because people don't get out of math and then they change their major. They're like, well, I was going to be a doctor, but now I'm going to go be a sociologist instead. Which is nothing wrong with sociologists, but that's what they were seeing here, right? Was that students were leaving their STEM pursuits, right? That they had STEM aspirations and they were leaving them because they were like, I can't even get out of math. I can't even get out of this course. So we got to change the curriculum. Another structure, this one comes out of, so this anytime there's a QR code, you can pull the article. This is open access. It's an open access journal. We published 8 articles in AERA Open, so they're all open access, me and my colleague Marcela Cuellar, and they were all about intersectionality in HSIs. And this one came through, we did a call and then we, went through the process of journal, reviews and whatnot. And this one was about internships. And I was like, internships? I never thought about internships as servingness, right? Like, interesting. Let's see what comes out. It was fascinating. I was like, oh, this is structures for serving. So for example, we think that high impact practices are good for students. Internships is a good high impact practice. George Koo convinced us all a long time ago, 2008 to be specific, like boom, high impact practices like takes off, right? Now we want to do undergraduate research, we want to do internships, we want to do study abroad, we want to do all these things because the research shows that they're good. Yes, but who are they good for and or do students have access to it? And that's what comes out of this is like, yes, internships are good, but guess what? A lot of students don't have access to them. So are we even providing the good thing that we know is good? Because students can't access something that we don't actually provide for them, right? And or if we're not thinking about who it's good for. So for the undergraduate research, for example, undergraduate research, hands down, all the research says those are great spaces for students. You get like 12 students in an undergraduate research program every year, right? It's like 12. It's like, okay, you got 12,000 students. You might have 32,000, so you got 12 students there. And I'm exaggerating, of course, but it's a very small number that actually feel that. How do we elevate that? How do we make that part of servingness? If we know it's good, then how do we make it for everybody? That's part of servingness is how do we make it for everybody? Last week on Que Pasa HSIs, that's the second plug. I plug, y'all. Y'all gonna be listening to Que Pasa HSIs on your way home. You got an hour commute, boom. got a whole episode done. Que pasa HSIs. Listen to last week's episode, Arlene Cano Matute and students from UC Riverside. It's such a beautiful episode. They talk in ways that I'm like, this is the embodiment of servingness. They embodied servingness in the Chicano student programs in beautiful ways. And they talk a lot about that it's not across the campus, right? That it's only here. So if we know Chicano student programs and Arlene and her students and all this great work is going on, how do we elevate that? How do we make sure other students have access to it? Because only so many students enter that space. So only so many students get access to this beautiful space that is doing servingness. How do we elevate that? How do we make it happen across the campus, right? That's the reality. Those of you that are in classrooms, it's got to happen in your classrooms. Those of you that are in financial aid, I'm going to pick on financial aid some more. It's got to happen in financial aid, right? It's got to happen across the campus. That's servingness. That's where it would truly be elevated. So this one was really cool because it talks about this idea of internships and like how do we do these high impact practices if they're not available to all students. This one's about advising. I'm going to wrap up because I'm running out of time, and we don't have time for questions, by the way. So you're going to have to come to my workshop after lunch. Plugs. See, I'm good at plugs. You give me the microphone, I'm gonna plug all the things. But it's true, y'all, there's no microphone, so you can't ask no questions. Advising. So this one, also UC Santa Cruz, they ask students in focus groups. First of all, if you're not asking students about HSI, you should start asking some students, right? We're like, how are we going to serve students? And like, we don't ask any students, right? Ask some students. So they did focus groups, and students said they were experiencing microaggressions in their advising sessions. Yeah, I see a big head nod over there. You must know this one. I was like, that hurts my heart. Advising is supposed to be a safe space, right? I'm a trained student affairs professional. I'm like, we do this work outside of the classroom. Apparently not. Students were experiencing microaggressions in advising. And so what did they do? They said, well, we're going to retrain all our advisors. We're not going to train them how to do their jobs. They know how to do their jobs. We're going to train them on what a microaggression is and how not to do it. Because the reality is, and whenever I give this talk, somebody inevitably is like, well, what does a microaggression in advising look like? It's usually an advisor thinking, I hope I've never done that. You may have, right? That's the reality, is microaggressions are hard. And we live in a society where systems of oppression kind of get the best of all of us, right? We're kind of wrapped up in systems of oppression. We have to push back on them. And if we don't push back on them, we might be reinforcing some of those things. So they did a training. They did a whole day conference kind of like this and talked about microaggressions. They did like Theater of the Oppressed, and if you know Theater of the Oppressed, where they had students act out the microaggressions on stage. And in Theater of the Oppressed full model, the folks from the audience can actually come up and disrupt it and engage with the theater. And so that's cool, right? That's a cool way to train faculty and staff. They weren't just talking at them, they were engaging them. And faculty left that. They collected data, or staff advisors left that and said, you know, I learned some stuff. Right? I didn't realize I was doing this, and now I know how not to do it. So we have to assess what's going on, because if we just think and intuitively think about what's going on, we might be missing what actually is going on for our students, right? What's going on for our students. I'm not going to go deep into outcomes because I'm just about out of time, and I know y'all getting hungry. But just real quickly, the experiences. I'm not going to talk about academic because those are easy peasy. This one, people like the liberatory outcomes, right? Particularly those of you that are more in like student services spaces, right, and student affairs spaces. This is what we do, right? Now, what we want to think about is, how do we do this? Like racial identity development, where does that happen? I mean, maybe it's your multicultural center, but what if it was in your disability services center? What if it was in your LGBTQIA center? What if it was in your center where undocumented students are? I actually was just going through some data yesterday, and a person talked about how their queer student and their undocumented student center was wrapped up together. And they were separating it, unfortunately, but they said it was kind of interesting because we started finding queer students having some aggressions, being anti-undocumented, and undocumented students being anti-queer, right? And them being able to bring that into the space. What a cool thing to like cross spaces together that you wouldn't have actually thought about, the fact that some of that's going to come up, right? Because it will come up. Our students are dealing with a lot of this stuff too. So how do we disrupt it? How do we train them? How do we think through racism, microaggressions, and all the systems of oppression in all of our spaces? So I love the identity development one because I think we could all do that. We could all, in all of our spaces, think about how do we allow students to explore their identities in our space. right? It's not just the one cultural center that has to do it. Like everybody can do that kind of stuff. Community engagement is a big one, but thinking about community engagement for communities of color, not on communities of color. That's an interesting one, right? Like, how do we engage with communities rather than just going out and thinking we're gonna like save communities, right? Actually working with communities and doing good work in collaboration. I love critical consciousness. That one, if you've ever taken an ethnic studies course, that's a core outcome of ethnic studies. I think about, well, why can't we have critical consciousness come out of psychology and math and chemistry and everything? Because it can. Right, we have to think differently about the curriculum that we're delivering to get these sort of outcomes. So the liberatory outcomes are becoming really popular for people, and people are like calling me up, like I said, this provost, and saying, how do we measure this? Because now we're committed to doing this, Gina. And it was interesting that conversation with that provost. He said we picked 4. What do you think? Actually, I think he said 3, and then I think I threw critical consciousness in there. I was like, what about critical consciousness? That was a good one. And he was like, well, it's like advanced. And I thought that was interesting. So the general ed, you might have level 1 of liberation. Liberation is levels to it, right? Level 1 might be racial identity development and identity development in general. You got to allow students to explore who they are before they can get into consciousness and engaging with communities and disrupting systems of oppression. Right? That's kind of like the stages. Anybody that's ever, studied the stages of critical consciousness, identity is part like early stages, right, of the work. So I thought that was valid. I said, okay, your GE, maybe that's the 101, and then the 201, and then 301 might be critical consciousness, and maybe 401 is community engagement. Right? That might be a way to think about it. I loved that conversation, actually, right? I was like, oh, you're right. These could come at different points. I have graduate school aspirations there to think about the fact that we need more people of color going to graduate school. What about mental health and well-being? It's such a big conversation. On one slide, I think I have joy, right? Joy, just being joyful could be an outcome, right? A liberatory outcome that we want our students to have. So the liberation is becoming really important. I think I'm going to stop there because I'm running out of time, but I am going to fast forward. I know y'all get boss HSIs. I told you 3 plugs. There's the QR code all big. Feel free to scan the QR code and tune in. Thank you all for engaging with me for this.
Give it up for Dr. Garcia, everybody. Yes. I have something for you. We just have a little small token of appreciation and say thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us today. Thank you for just being a phenomenal woman. We appreciate you. Give it up, everybody. Thank you.